Good morning, everyone. The trainer today is Solarzar de la Porta. He has been a Toastmasters for more than 2 decades. He also has been a two-time division director. Please help me welcome the two-time distinguished Toastmaster, Solarzar de la Porta.
Well, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and put the screen up right now so you can all see it. Whoop. And we're going to talk about training skills for today's Toastmasters. I want to tell a little bit about myself that wasn't part of Abhijit's introduction, is that what we're going to share today, what I'm going to share today, does not come from Toastmasters. So I've been training both in my time in the Marine Corps and subsequent to that. And I was certified as a master trainer in 2002. I took a series of courses through the training clinic in 2001 and 2002. And this is really about training skills. So it's applicable to Toastmasters, but it's not from Toastmasters. Now, you may know some of this because you picked it up by osmosis, but it's not the same as what you would actually get from Toastmasters. So I just want to share that to start out. Now, A.H. Alma's told us to contact the deeper truth of who we are. We must engage in some activity or practice that questions what we assume to be true about ourselves. And the reason I start out with this, because as a trainer, we're not a speaker. A speaker wants to inform, they want to entertain, they want to inspire, they want to motivate. As a trainer, we want to change behaviors. So we have to question our motivation going into a training session. It's not about us. It's about what the attendees can take away and change in their own lives. And so question that as we go forward. Now, to start, I'm going to start with a few things. I'm going to ask each of you as we go around to give your name, your club, your experience as a trainer, and as I go backwards, and what you would like to get out of today's session. So your name, your club, your experience as a trainer, and what you would like to get out of today's session. I'm going to start to my immediate right with Lillian.
Thank you. I am Lillian Felsiglier. I'm from Fuquay Varina, North Carolina. I've been a Toastmaster for about 3 years now. As far as training, I do have a training class where I help the members that are used to paper books get acclimated to Pathways and Basecamp. I will be giving a class on a TLI.
You froze up,
about
Lillian.
those two very subjects.
Oh, there we
and
go.
Sorry. And as far as training goes, I've been training. I did my training for 26 years with assistant managers, and crew people in McDonald's.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lillian. And now we'll go to Cherry.
Good morning, this is Cherry. I belong to two clubs, San Jose Toastmaster and Apatow Toastmaster. I was a COT trainer, treasurer and SAA last year, I believe. What's my expectation? I know Solarzar is a very great trainer, so I don't have any specific expectation, but I know that I'm going to learn a lot from you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sherry. Daniel, you, sir.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. I'm with 3 clubs: Saratoga Toastmasters, Morgan Hill Toastmasters, FCSN Toastmasters, and really the only training I can think of really is the training that I've done for officers in Toastmasters. As far as what I want to get out of this, it's of course just to up my game, which there's plenty of opportunity for that potentially. And I am very trustful that Solarzar is the man here to be taking on this task of communicating all the neat skills and whatnot. I will mention as well that as I've done more training, I've really gotten to enjoy it a lot more as well. So maybe that's what I want to get out of this, is to be able to enjoy training even more.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel. I hope that that's part of your outcome as well. Carol.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Carol Zhang. I'm from Intercontinental Advanced Club and also a club in Malaysia. Well, this is my first time joining a training class. I'm just looking forward to learn more, as most of the time, I only learn to be a Toastmaster. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Carol. And then Carrie Lynn, how about you, my lady?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Carrie Lynn Morgan. I am with Aptos Toastmasters. I've done a lot of training outside of Toastmasters. I'm a communication coach. Inside of Toastmasters, I've taught a lot of people how to use Zoom, for sure. So yeah, I just have a lot of experience being in front of people and guiding them along whatever way we're working on. And as far as getting out what I want to get out of this training today, I'd really like to know like what your expectations are for trainers with Toastmasters. You know, are there specifics to cover, or are, you know, do we get to kind of not necessarily do our own thing, but like how much leeway is there, and what do you expect from the trainers is really what I would like to know. Specifics or not specifics, either way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carrie Lynn, for sharing that. Carlene.
Thanks. Good morning. And I have to remain off camera because of my bandwidth. But good morning, everyone. Good to see you. I'm happy to be here. I am with 3 clubs in North Carolina here. I am currently serving as our PQD, and I'm here because I want to be able to equip more of my members to take on the task of participating in TLIs and in our club officer trainings. I'm just trying to pick up some tips and to see how I can organize a train-to-trainer for my own district. As far as my own experience, I've trained a lot of staff on my job, and I've participated in training officers and area directors in my district. Back to you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Carlene. And
You're
Pamela.
Thank you, Solarzar. My name is Pamela McHenry. I am a member of Santa Cruz Orators, and I'm in the process of joining another club. It hasn't gone through yet, but I will be part of Aptos, I'm thinking pretty soon. My experience has been as a research scientist, a published, peer-reviewed medical holistic health articles at the hospital for many years. I used to train research people to do statistics and do studies, and I had a lot of experience training them how to do objective analysis, as well as I started out 21 years old in San Francisco. They put me in a supervisory role to train other people how to be good leaders at Standard Oil, Chevron in San Francisco. So I started out that way, and now I'm very involved in learning now. That's why I want to take this, because I want to learn today from Solarzar new ways of love, acceptance, how to help other people, have good listening skills to see where people are coming from, to help them expand their own gifts and skills, and to be very objective. And I'm open to learn new things. And it's also helping me in my private practice, which I am a faculty member and help people to learn good leadership skills as well. So I'm looking forward to this. Thank you, Solarzar, for doing
Thank you,
that.
Pamela. That's quite a buffet of what you would like to get out of today's training. So And then Kate, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
All right. Is it challenging to talk? Would you rather put something in the chat?
I can talk. I'm here. I had my 5th booster yesterday for COVID.
Okay.
Yeah. So just getting through that. All good. You want to know? I joined late, so I don't know what you specifically want.
So your name, your club, your experience as a trainer, and what you would like to get out of today's session.
Sure. My name is Kate Platt. My clubs are Excalibur and Career Nexus Toastmasters Club. And what I want to get out of today. Oh, what experience I've had as a trainer. I've trained folks to ride bicycles. I've trained folks to do work health and safety practices. I've trained businesses and corporations to do, like we call them muddy boots, which is basically all sorts of environmental training in regards to, I was thinking, building sites and mine sites in Australia, you name it. And what I want to get out of today is learn something new from you, Solarzar.
Okay.
Back to you.
Okay. Well, I hope you do learn something new. Lipping, what would you give us your name, your club, experience as a trainer, and what you'd like to receive out of today's training?
Thanks. Good morning, Solarzar. Good morning, everyone. And my name is Li Ping, and I belong to 2 clubs regularly, San Jose Toastmaster Club and the Agile Articulator Speech and Debate Club. And for me, regarding the training is, I've been trainer for, here and there a little bit in my life or at work, but I'm a very humble person until right now. I all of a sudden realize I need to be, and I'm qualified to be a trainer, like in many aspects in my life. And then I found that I'm not a good trainer sometimes. So that's what I want to learn, how I can in a better position to dump out my knowledge, my skill to the person who wants to receive in a better transfer way, in a better way. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Lipping. And Anna, how about you? Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Solarzar. I have trained every position except the PPR here at Toastmasters. I also train on software that I manage through my job. What I am here to do is to just reconnect on basics. It's always good to go back to basics and make sure that you're still doing what you should be doing. So that's what I'm here to do. Thanks, Solarzar.
And thank you so much, Anna. And Karatkea, how about you, sir? Your name, your club, experience as a trainer, and what you'd like to get out of today's session. You're muted, so we're not hearing all your profound words.
Yes, thank you, Solarzar. My name is Karthik, and good morning to everyone, wherever you are located. Greetings. I am a member with San Mateo Storytellers currently, and I will like to just learn from all of you how you guys go about this element of training and learning to train others. Recently, I became a secretary with the club, and eventually I will like to move on to different positions or as a club officer as well. That's in the Toastmasters context. Obviously, in outside the Toastmasters context, I love to share and learn about yoga, meditation, breathing practices. So I would love to eventually be able to transfer this knowledge as well and be able to teach or train someone, be it friends, family, or maybe in a professional environment.
Okay.
So
And
yeah.
what's the proper pronunciation of your name?
Kartikeya is
Kartikeya.
my
So
complete name.
Kartikeya.
I
Okay.
usually go with Karthik. Yes.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks so much. And Sarika, thank you for joining us. What your name, your club, experience as a trainer, and what you'd like to get out of today's training.
I'm Surika Shamana. I'm joining from Denver, Colorado, but I'm also an Abhijit's 101 Club Intercontinental Toastmasters. So many of you were familiar. We were up last night. As a trainer, I have trained pretty much every role in a Toastmasters Club. I have held every role except a finance officer and a secretary, a treasurer and a secretary. So I have trained all of those roles. But what I'm trying to learn from this meeting is how to be a good trainer. I have done it what I thought I should do. I've never had an official training, and now I'm in a position where I believe having a thought process of what trainers do really well would help me grow in my career.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. And I realize as we go around, people may say, oh, you know, we always do this. Well, we're going to explain why we do this, and we're going to also address what you'd like to get out of it. Now, one of the things you want to get from today's training is the workshop belongs to you, and the success is all about you. Enter into discussions enthusiastically. There are no wrong ideas. There are no right ideas. There are ideas and guides that we'll be sharing. Give freely of your experience that goes to any of the points we bring up. And once again, say what you think to the group. Please stay out of the chat for private discussions. You know, if you want to say something and share a question, that's quite all right. But let's not get inside discussions so that we can all participate with what's going on. Appreciate the other person's point of view and be prompt in returning from breaks. Hopefully we'll have some breaks. We have breaks scheduled, but a lot of it is a crunch. This is an 8-hour class that was reduced down to 4 hours, that was reduced down to 3 hours. So we're trying to put in all the elements that are most critical to answer some of your questions. And I want to address a couple of those now. The course objectives are, you're going to be able to use a gap analysis to determine training objectives. What do you need to train to the people who are in your class? You'll be able to choose the right training method. You'll be able to apply facilitation techniques to your training, and you'll be able to apply your skills to be effective as a club officer trainer. Now, this is not a specific club officer training. Everything you learn here, you can apply to club officer training. Everything you learn here, you can apply to any training. It's not meant to make everybody an expert, but what it's going to show you is the things you're doing that you're doing well, and now you'll know why. So you're going to find that you're doing some of this already. We're not going to deal with, as Carrie Lynn mentioned too, we're not going to be dealing with how best to do it on Zoom or how best to do it in this medium, but we are going to be dealing with the skills you bring to doing a training, whether it's online or in person. Are there any questions about that before we move forward? I'm going to say one other thing, which is, well, I'm going to say a lot of things actually, but I'm going to say one other thing is, I'm originally from New York. I talk fast. If you have a question, raise a hand, or you can take yourself off mute and say, Solarzar, I have a question, but I will go fast. But you're welcome to interrupt at any time with any question you have to make sure that the information being presented makes sense to you. If it doesn't make sense to you, it's a good chance it's not making sense to someone else. So don't be shy about that. I will ignore all raised hands and anybody who calls out though, because I'm not going to answer any questions. I just want to set the expectation. All right, let's move forward. Here's how a training flows. First, you have to determine what needs to be trained. Now, in a club officer training, we do provide guidelines in District 101. And going to Carrie Lynn's question earlier of, yeah, the expectations are you're going to take the information we provide as a guide and frame your own training out of it. Make the training that you can present because somebody else wrote that training plan, and present it in a way that you believe makes sense for the attendees that you have in your room. As Daniel said, he's learned to appreciate training more as he's done it more, but a big part of training for me is the people in the room, because we get so much from learning from their experience or hearing their questions or issues. But after we do a gap analysis, then we do a lesson plan. And lesson plans are based on adult learning theory. Now, we're not going to go into it in great detail. You're not going to be able to suddenly be certified in adult learning theory, but you'll understand what the elements are that adults want in their learning. A child is an open book. Adults are not. We already have a lot of the pages in our book filled. So this is how do we add more pages to an adult's book? Which methods are the most effective to train for different types of activities? Facilitation techniques are really about guiding discussions and questions. And then the evaluation of the program, is it doing the job you want it to do? Is what you presented helping to adjust and train, adjust behavior and change behavior? Now, the first thing you want to do in any training is establish rapport and use an icebreaker. So I have a question. What was our icebreaker today? Carrie Lynn.
The questions that you asked us, you know, your name, your club, what's your experience?
That's right. And it serves a dual purpose. Now, one, it gets all of us an opportunity to see each person express themselves. It's a very simple, non-threatening icebreaker. Everybody knows their name. Everybody knows their club. Everybody has trained or hasn't trained, and they all have an expectation of what they'd like to get. There are no wrong answers, so it's non-threatening. Icebreaker is not a party game. We don't suddenly put Post-its on our notes with different names and ask people to give us clues so we can identify who we really are. Icebreaker has to be non-threatening in a training situation. Why? Because we have introverts and we have extroverts. Whether we're in a room or whether we're on Zoom, people have different reactions to being called on or to be asked things. So it must be non-threatening, something everyone can engage in without feeling automatic anxiety. And they need to apply to the training curriculum. One time I heard a person in a train the trainer session say, well, I like to break the ice by asking people what they had for breakfast. Has nothing to do with the training curriculum. That might be nice when you're having a group together or you're trying to break the ice in some other way, but not in training. We want our icebreakers to apply. I went to a session back in the late 90s with the company I was employed. They brought us all in. They didn't tell us what the training session was. The trainer sat us all down and had us write our names on a piece of paper. Then we had to exchange that piece of paper with someone else. And that person had to try to duplicate our signature, try to forge our signature. And then the point of that exercise is she told us forgers will often use their non-dominant hand to forge someone else's signature because the dominant hand wants to automatically go to the way we write. Now, I'll give $50 to anyone, I mean it, who can guess what that training session was about. Take a guess. Go for the $50.
Fraudulent trading? Fraud?
Nope, nope.
Oh, I was going to say working for the FBI.
No.
Understanding personality disorders?
No.
The Easter Bunny.
No, that's probably closer. It was sexual harassment. The training session was on sexual harassment. The icebreaker had nothing to do with the training. We spent 20 minutes on something that had nothing to do with the training and didn't build rapport because we already knew each other. We were a group of 20 people that knew each other very, very well. So use your icebreakers that to apply to the training. So if it's about team building, it should apply to team building. If it's about communication, it should be related to communication. It doesn't have to be a communication exercise per se, but you need to be able to make the point back to the training we did. So as Carrie said, our icebreaker was your name, your club, your training experience, and what you would like to get out of it. But that leads into my introduction, your name, your club, and your experience as a trainer. That was our pure icebreaker. But notice your experience as a trainer is in purple because there's a second part. We want to take an assessment of everybody in the room. We want to say what's their current skill level and what's their required skill level. The required skill level is brought to us by these two questions: your experience and what you would like to get out of this training based on your experience. That's the gap analysis. It's a very simple thing to do. So almost every training session we do as a club officer training or anything else, we want to know a current skill level and a required skill level. We also know the objectives of the training. What are we going to cover? And that helps us adapt what we're doing to the required skill level of the people in the room. Does that make sense to everyone? And it's done very simply. As you can see, it's not rocket science. It's not meant to be complex, but it doesn't help for me to jump right into the training without knowing where you are and what you want to get out of it. Doesn't help at all. Because I could talk all day about everything you don't want to know. You know, it would be a really wonderfully put together training session, but I haven't achieved my objectives. Now, trainers have gotten more pompous in the last 20 years or so. So you hear all of them now are facilitators. They're all facilitators. So training was always based on the change of behavior. Now you'll see people say trainers just give information, but facilitators change behavior. I don't really care what you call yourself. Just know that our goal is to provide information in a way people can understand it and make adjustments for themselves. Any questions? Good.
No.
Oh, there's a question. I heard a voice. I'm hearing voices.
There's a question from Daniel in the chat.
Oh, Daniel. Will the slide deck be shared? Daniel, earlier in the session, I put in the chat, Train the Trainer combined handout. Following this session, I will not be sharing the slide deck. You're getting a 30-page handout, which has all of this information in greater detail than we're going to present today, plus additional information. Now, since you asked that question, I'll give you a little sneak peek. This is, share the screen, go here. This is the handout you'll be getting. It shows you, again, what do I want to get from today's training? What is your Toastmaster? It gives a sample icebreaker for a club officer training. You don't have to use these. You can adapt these. Then it's going to give you the difference between speakers and trainers. This is a test we're going to be doing in a little bit, so I'm not going to linger on it. I don't want you to cheat. Then we're going to talk about communication styles in our training. And then further on, this has much more information than what you're going to get in the session, talking about questions. It's going to how to use questions to facilitate, which we will touch, how to use colors in your PowerPoints, which we won't touch in today's, tips for using PowerPoint, problem participants, no firearms involved, words to choose, words to lose, as well as club officer training guideline. You're going to get that entire handout as a follow-on to this session. Now, people who actually just get the video won't get the handout. Those of you who attended, you'll get this handout. So it'll give you a lot more information. So does that help you, Daniel?
And question, is that the same thing that you put in the chat? That's the same
It is
document?
exactly the same thing I put in the chat.
Okay.
But for those who don't get it out of the chat, everybody's going to get the email with that attached to it. Much more information than actually the slides would give you. So.
Yeah, it does answer the question. They are a little different, and the slides have really nice pictures. So,
well, I can send you the slides. I can send you, but you know, the slides are an appetizer. The meal is in the handout. So if you'd still like the slides, I'll send everybody oh, Anna asked if I would repost it. So let me repost.
I have a quick question over here.
Go ahead.
So it seems like when you say the gap analysis and the level of the current skill levels of the audience versus what your training is supposed to achieve, right? Seems like you have to have in your training some layers built in such that if the audience who turned up is maybe from the advanced skill level, mostly from the advanced skill level, you're trying to address their needs in a different way. But if they are at a beginner level, then you're trying to address. Now, what happens if there's a mix and match? You might, you know, for a given limited time, just like this meeting from 8 hours to 4 hours to 3 hours, you might lose out on some valuable content to begin with, but now you won't be addressing the needs of the different skill levels, if it's a mix and match of all kind of skill levels, right, of in your audience. So how do you adapt your training to that? I'll be interested to learn about that.
Well, is there anyone here who has never been to a club officer training? Okay, so I'm going with the fact that all of you have. Let's address it directly there because it's a common experience. So we'll start with that. For instance, in one of my trainings, I had an individual, very opinionated, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, very opinionated, very long time Toastmaster. And so what I did is in that case, because most of the rest of the people were not, I didn't want him to dominate so I told him he would be part of the training with me. I would be referring to him and I engaged him in that way. But I let him know that I told him in the session, I said, I'm going to use Daniel, I'm going to use you by name, but it wasn't Daniel. I would say, Daniel, so with all your experience, I'm going to rely on you to help me through the training session. But we want to make sure we get the information that Pamela and Karatuke and Abhijit and Kate need to get in this session. So you may hear some information that's a little more redundant or that you're familiar with, but I'll call on you on different times to help work with me. And so I set that stage right up front. That's also, as I'm going through the gap analysis, I'm listening for that. If I have a very experienced group, let's say you're all very experienced trainers, I would actually say, okay, Lillian, what's the most common training issue you've run into that you would like to discuss with the group? Now I've changed everything. Instead of going from my planned agenda, now I'm going to engage all of the experienced people to have that conversation and a discussion about what their issues are and let them commonly really train each other in the process. So usually we're going to get a mix. We're going to get some experienced people with our non-experienced or less experienced people. So I always try to engage them. And go ahead, Karatake. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yes, I'm good. I'm good. I would just give a thumbs up.
Oh, that was a thumbs
Thank
up. Okay.
Yes.
I wasn't sure which finger it was, so I want to.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay. So very good question. Thank you so much for asking that. So as we said, we go to our gap analysis and we determine our level of experience and what's going on. Now, we set our own training objectives. As I said to Carrie Lynn earlier, or to the group from Carrie Lynn's question, in District 101, we're going to put out these training handouts that we have that are samples of guidelines for our trainers. Now, a training objective must describe an action. You have to be very specific. Be specific and detailed using action verbs, be attainable and realistic. So before you start to do a club officer training or any training, determine your objectives. These were our objectives. You'll be able to do a gap analysis to determine training objectives. You'll be able to use the right training method. You'll be able to apply facilitation techniques, and you'll be able to apply your skills as an effective COT trainer. And that's how we applied them here. Now, it's a little early, but it's time for a quick break if you'd like to take one, or if you want, we can go forward to the next break. Group consensus, keep going. Carrie Lynn said, keep going, keep going. We want to get things going. Okay, so since we're going to keep going, whoop, wrong thing, wrong share, stop the share. There we go. Time for break. We're back.
That's a quick one.
So now what we're going to do, it's time. We're actually going to take a little bit of a test. I'm going to put a link into the chat. I would like you all to go to that form and complete it. And then once you're done, we'll be able to discuss what it was about and what we can learn from it. So there's a link in the chat. If you don't see the link, please let me know and go ahead and complete the form. And remember, you will actually receive an email with your responses. So don't worry about what you said or don't forget about it. You're going to get an email with your responses. So please go ahead and complete the form.
Hey, Solarzar, quick question.
Yes.
On question number 4 or point number 4, it says I press down hard when I am writing. Is it like some figurative speech? I mean, expression, press down hard, or what does it really mean? Literal press down?
When you write, do you write hard into the paper, or do you write light, or do you write
Okay.
natural? In other words,
Got it.
so, and you just give the best answer that strikes you. There's no wrong answers here.
Thank you.
And I'm assuming when you play with things in your pockets, objects, that could be anything on your desk, in your, in your hand, something around you. It's not in your pocket
Yeah, as
necessarily.
long as it's your pockets and not someone else's pockets. Yeah. And after you hit submit, when you come back, just raise your hand so I know that you're done. Raise your virtual hand. I don't want you sitting there like this.
Solarzar, can you please put the workbook link into the chat? I didn't, if for some reason it didn't come up for me. Thank you.
I will certainly do that. Okay, Carrie Lynn, Anna, thank you. Thank you, Lipping.
How many questions are there? I'm only to 24.
Abhijit's done. How many questions for those who finished? I don't remember without.
25?
It's like 24.
24? We're almost done, Pamela.
Yes. Oh, I.
Thank you, Carrot. Okay, Carrot. Okay. And remember, there are no wrong answers here. And your answers are not going to be shared with anyone else. Except for Pamela's. We're all going to look at.
Good. I could be the bad example today. Thanks.
Okay, Cherry, are you done or still working? You're done? Okay. Raghu, are you done? Sophia, are you done?
I'm doing.
Okay. Mamta, how are you? Are you done? All right, so we're gonna, while others are still working, we're gonna move on because what we have to recognize is that there are different styles in every room. Now, there are different communication styles, and you've heard about this: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And in the last 20 years, they've also added in reading because of people who need to have their nose next to a device all the time. I don't use reading because it doesn't really matter in the context of our training. Visual, auditory, and kinesthetic do matter. Now, 70% of the population is visual. And so we have to always remember that when we're putting together a training session. I've heard people say, oh, I do my club officer training, but I never use a PowerPoint. Well, 70%, potentially 70% of your audience is visual. You've got to give them something. I shouldn't be the something that you have to get. So therefore, I always use PowerPoint because I want to give you something visual. Even Daniel loved the pictures, you know. So let's take a look as we go forward from the young gentleman setting off his rocker, the cues to communication style. Visual people, you can also identify by their language. Now in the handout, you're going to get a lot more detail about the language of visual people. But see, look, clear, focus, watch, that type of language identifies a visual person. They have a still body movement, and they can be fast and impatient talkers. Auditory or listen, talk, hear, appear, sounds like. They do like to read, which is why I don't put readers in as a difference. Auditory like to have something to read. Whoops, I went back to visual. I hit my roller ball. The body can move back and forth, and they can be long talkers and talk about what they're going to say as they're saying it, because I think, as I've thought about it, and that's not an absolute, but if somebody's a long talker, you can generally intimate that they're going to be auditory. And kinesthetic, I'm a kinesthetic, I'm a mover. I feel, grasp, hold, handle, grab, touch, lots of body movement. When I'm in a Zoom meeting, other than one where I'm training, I'm playing with something all the time. I'm playing with something down below the screen level, you know, especially for those who know I do magic. I have thimbles, I have dice, I have balls, I have coins, I have all that stuff right here, and I'm playing with my sleight of hand below everything. So they tend to be fast talkers. Now in an in-person meeting, 20%, of course, 70% are visual, 20% are auditory, and 10% are kinesthetic. In an in-person meeting, we always had toys for the kinesthetics to play with. It's not that the others didn't play with them, but certainly the kinesthetics would. Now, what's going to happen is we're not going to go ahead and do your assessment, but in the handout, the last several pages of the handout actually have a scoring grid. So when you take your email that has your answers on it, you can go forward and score your grid and say, are you a predominant visual? Are you a predominant auditory? Are you a predominant kinesthetic? Recognizing that we're all of them. We just have dominance in certain areas. But we want to pay attention to that because we want to give something to every one of our people. So what did we do kinesthetically today? Does anybody want to hazard a guess?
Sorry, my mic has been on. I apologize for the roosters. But doing the test.
Boom, boom. Yeah, we did the test. You had to do something physical. Very good, Carrie Lynn. Excellent. That's exactly it. That was our kinesthetic thing. So our auditory thing, reading the slides, our visual thing, seeing the slides, our kinesthetic thing, doing the test. So we try to build something in for everyone. Does that make sense? Everyone got that? Good, thank you. Yeah. Any other questions about that, or even about the test? I don't want to rush past that quickly.
Are they people who can be dominant, like equally dominant in more than one? Because
yes.
I have, okay.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you'll tend to be choosy about when and where. But very often the people I find that are dominant in more than one tend to actually still want both things. It's not a question of, they'll learn well one way in certain situations, but they still want the other thing. You know, but
Thank
yes.
you.
And by the way, this test is not the absolute test. You know, so this is a very short question test. You're going to go phone, you're going to say, oh, these were my dominant styles. These are my preferred way of learning. But the important lesson to take away as a trainer is 70% visual, 20% auditory, 10% kinesthetic. Now, if you walked into a room of scientists, I'll guarantee you won't have that same split. You know, certain career paths are going to attract people of a certain type more than others. So it's also good if you have the opportunity as a trainer to listen to the language And the handout has much more specifics about the language. You know, for instance, someone who says they understand something, if they're visual, I see what you mean. No, see what you mean. You know, or an auditory might, I hear what you're saying. Or a kinesthetic might say, that fits, I understand. You know, but also when they're saying goodbye, you know, visual, I'll see you later. I'll talk to you later if you're auditory, and I'll be in touch if you're kinesthetic. So you could just try to listen to the language to get a sense of where the person is. And that also allows you to adapt to your training session. What I try to do is I also try to say, I believe, I think, and I hear, I see. I try to interchange the words and might be redundant in some of the things I'm saying just because I want the person to catch it. And you can think about that as you plan and prepare your training and you think about it going forward. So,
Solarzar, Anna
yes.
has a question.
Anna, is that a question or was that your hand up from before?
I put it down, then I put it back up.
Okay, thank you. Ask your
Well,
question, please.
Yeah. So if somebody says I don't like using slides, that their dominant is auditory. Is
More
that
than likely, yes. But that's not accounting for what are we doing as trainers?
right? No, I think what you have illustrated very well here is that we should be thinking of other people, not just relying on how we learn.
Right.
That's what you've illustrated, that you're a mixed audience, right?
And yes, and there are some people who in the Zoom environment also are very uncomfortable using PowerPoint or slides. I understand that as well. But that doesn't mean you have to use as many slides even as I use. But if you can try to say, I know I've got visual people out there, I want to give them something to look at periodically. So does that address your question, Anna?
Yeah, yep. I was just kind of thinking like we must be, as trainers, we probably lean on our dominant, whatever we're dominant in, but we should just be aware that we've got a mixed bag with our audience.
That's right. As a matter of fact, for those who heard Matt Kinsey speak at the Fall Fusion, where he was talking about, you know, the golden rule is treat others as you want to be treated. But he said, actually, that's been updated to the platinum rule. Treat others as they want to be treated. So as a trainer, going back to what you shared, Anna, it's not about how I want to learn. It's about how 70% want to learn, 20% want to learn, and 10% want to learn. I want to try to incorporate that as best I can. You know, you can't always do everything in every training session, but at least you'll be aware of it. You'll be aware of trying to satisfy that need for each of your attendees. That's the importance about what I hope comes away from today's training more than anything else, is that you know you're doing some things well, but now you'll know why you're doing them well. And you know you're not doing some things, but you'll know why you weren't doing them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Excellent question. Going to questions. Any more questions about the communication styles? I think not. I think not.
I might want to say, I like the way that you formed the answers that we did. It was a little more open than just yes, no. So that was, you know what I mean?
Yes. Okay. And
do you take the slides? Do you take the slides off once in a while to accommodate for all different kinds of people in a Zoom? Is that a trick?
What I'll do is, let's do it here. Let's go back to this. Let's say the question slide, let's say it's a material slide. I would say something like, okay, we've already covered this. Let's go to the next issue. So I'll go forward. So because we start the training before I do the gap analysis, I don't know what you do want to learn or what you don't want to learn. But if we've already talked about that issue in great detail, we can skip that slide and move to the next thing because we've covered it. We don't have to stick on that. That's up to me. Whether you realize it or not, I have a set of the slides in front of me in paper so I can look down and then know what's coming next. I don't have to memorize them, but it's a cheat sheet for me, so I know what's coming and I know if I can skip or not. Does that help, Sarika?
Yeah, thank you. That helps because I have often the complaint I get is the slide takes up the real estate on Zoom, and I liked how you take off the slides once in a while, and that was very helpful.
When I go like this to go back
Yeah.
and talk and have the discussion, yes. That's also an important technique. Yes, Carrie Lynn, I saw you were raising your hand.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think what you're about to say, Solarzar, is like, I found that with auditory learners, they get distracted by slides and they stop paying attention. And so doing this back and forth actually helps them because they get annoyed by slides. And so they just start to tune me out if I have the slides up too much.
Excellent point. And you'll notice as I use the slides, I don't put up a full slide. I do a lot of this, the automation, animation to make it come in, and I go through them quickly. The slides are nothing but a guide for those people that need to see something. That's all they are. And I don't want them to always be out there. This is when we're having rapport, when we're like this, when we're talking like this. We're not having rapport when a slide is taking up the screen. So that's also an important consideration. And if you're not comfortable with doing the technology, then set up a Zoom meeting of your own and practice it. It's really simple, just practice it. I fumble and stumble, as you can see. I didn't grow up being absolutely good at this. You know, I fumble and stumble all the time and keep learning. We're Toastmasters. We're a learning organization. Learn. Adults, learning theory is about adults want to be involved in their own learning. What does that mean? What are we doing here? We're dialogue, discussion, ask questions out loud. There's not a rigid and structured process of, you know, sometimes we do have raise your hand when we have a guest speaker or keynoter. But other than that, in a training session, we want it to be as interactive as possible because we want the adults engaged. Adults need to have a need to learn. You're here because you chose to have a need. Nobody made you come here. And I appreciate that you chose to see some potential value to be here. But if you were told you had to be here, you wouldn't be as excited about learning. But when you see the benefits of the learning, it also outweighs our resistance. I said earlier, children are an open book. Children want to learn everything. They want to do everything. The only mistake children have is that they want to be adults someday. Boy, oh boy, is that overrated. But the other thing is that they want to learn something. Oh, but as adults, we feel like we know. Oh, I know. I know. I've got this. So we have more resistance to learning. We have to have that benefit and that need. So when people come to club officer training, you know, you hear all the time, well, I'm here because I have to be here. You know, that's why I'm here. So we want to try to make it so engaging for that person that they want to be a part of it, either by making them a part of it. They're going to help with the training. We call on them. I turn and say, Lillian, last time you were president, did you have any experience like this? And so now I'm engaging Lillian directly to make her a part of the training, to make her a part of it. And that's the way to keep it. Adults have to see a benefit. They want to control their own learning, and they want to have a need to learn. In addition, they learn best from their own experiences. This is where it's going to get a little funny. Their experiences, our experiences are our filter that we take everything through. And that's why the best thing we can do is type new information and tie it to information people know. And it's called Velcro learning. You know, you often hear the complaint about male trainers are always using sports analogies, you know, well, that's a full count and boy, you know, bases are loaded and stuff like that. But try to think of it in the Toastmasters environment. We've all been to club officer training. Maybe some have been presidents or vice presidents of education or whatever else. And you could say to the people, well, in your club, does your vice president of education schedule people or do they just ask for volunteers? So now you're going to get them to recall something they know. Now what you're going to do is attach something new to that knowledge that they share with you. One of the best ways of keeping a schedule moving forward is to assign people and have them confirm their attendance. That would actually help you as new VPEs of keeping people in your schedule and moving their educational program forward. So I gave them a piece of information that I tied to what they already know. That's Velcro learning. That's what we want to try to do. We don't have to have sports analogies in Toastmasters when we're talking about something, but it goes for any topic you're training as well. when you're when you're going to train a particular topic, when Carrie Lynn does some of her consulting, she knows what her topics are. She knows who's asked her to train. She knows what their objectives are for the people that they want training. And she can take that information and tie what she's training to what their base of knowledge is. So always consider that one of the key elements you want to do to keep people in your training. Does that make sense to everyone? Do you understand? Okay. Any questions? That's good because I'm not taking any at this time, you know. So good. And adults like tangible rewards. And I was going to save this, but my tangible reward is you're getting a 30-page handout that's perfectly tailored to this training, plus more that you're going to get that you can apply. You can go through. It has more detail than what we're able to cover. And plus, you're going to have the ability to see the YouTube video of the training later as well. And you can expand on that yourself. Now, one key thing about training is understanding high value activities. People are always saying, well, you know, we shouldn't lecture for club officer training, but this is the learning activity matrix. This training matrix comes from the training clinic, which I have permission to use. It's their copyrighted information. I've modified it a little. I have permission to use for Toastmasters because I'm not charging for it. So I'm not selling their copyrighted information. But notice we have the learning objectives up here. We have learning facts and theories, learning visual identification, comprehending and applying facts, principles, concepts, performing perceptual motor skills, influencing attitudes, opinions. Now here we have activities. Lecture for learning facts and theory is a high value way of training facts and theories. So for club officer training, lecture is a high value. A demonstration is also a high value. It's a high return. It gives the greatest return for what we're doing. Now, people who say, oh, I did a role playing, it's not high for learning facts and theories. It's high for comprehending and applying facts and principles. But different activities give a greater return depending on what we're trying to do as the outcome of our training. So keep in mind, nothing wrong with lecturing, but you can combine techniques of what we shared here to improve that lecture. So it's not just lecture, you know, so it's discussion, it's lecture, it's some visuals, some activities. You can do all of that and get still a high return. If you're in person and you want to do a role play, that's fine. But in a Zoom environment, a role play is very challenging to pull off and manage effectively, and it's going to burn up time. You have 90 minutes to do your training as a club officer training. So you want to really keep in mind, what's my high value return to get the most information, the best change of behavior to my attendees. Does that make sense, or any questions about any of that? Carrie Lynn, you're smiling. Or is that just...
I love role playing and, you know, whatever. I like a challenge to do that on Zoom, but I hear what, you know, I totally hear what you're saying. And I was just thinking of like certain, you know, like SAA training, role playing could be really fun.
Absolutely.
How do you start a meeting? You know, let's practice starting a meeting or something like that.
You could go around and have everybody start the meeting, do their own start and something like that. That's absolutely correct. I'm glad you brought that point out. I'm glad I called you on your smile. So think of it in terms of, do you feel you get a good return on doing that? And especially as Carrie Lynn brought out with the SAA, that's a great role play right there to do, to let them go through the process of starting their meeting. So keep that in mind. I'm not saying role playing is bad. At the end of the day and at the end of this training, I want you to understand one thing. I'm giving you guidelines. I'm giving you hopefully some understanding of different things, but you're the trainer in your room. You're the trainer. You're going to make the choices of what you think will give you the best return. All right. When you lecture, avoid lecturing for more than 20 to 30 minutes before doing something else, you know, and that's what we've done here. Now it says interactive exercise in an in-person environment, much easier to do, of course. But in this environment, what we do is we shift things. If you notice, one of the shifts has already been mentioned. This is one of the shifts. You go from looking at a slide to now looking at all of us again. It's a shift. It's one way of trying to keep attention in the online environment. Now, Abhijit has brought out people lose interest, after an hour and 15 minutes. Actually, as you saw on the slide, 20 to 30 minutes, people are starting to drift. Your mind starts to wander. You're starting to think of other things. So you've got to keep things moving in a way that tries to continue to engage the attention of the audience, regardless of their communication style. And make sure that you're keeping that in mind. So even though we said lecture is a high value return for club officer training, if you're lecturing for 90 minutes, you've lost your audience 30 minutes in. Ask questions to promote involvement, which we've been doing. We use handouts. Now, the handout that you have, we're not using as a guide for this training. You have so much more, but you're going to get the handout as a part of it. Use visual aids. And for the interactive training activities, there's role play, there's case study, there's exercise, and there's demonstration. Now, role play, of course, is people playing a role to do something. A case study is where you study something and maybe have a discussion about it. An exercise is like we did with the communication styles. And a demonstration is we demonstrate something and then discuss it. But the elements are the participants must experience and share their experience. They must apply the principles and they must summarize the training. So that's the discussion piece. Here's what I mean by that. We went from you doing the communication exercise to talking about the different communication styles. That's kind of the summarization of what you did in the exercise. If we had actually tallied all of those, we would have talked about how many visuals do we have? How many auditories do we have? How many kinesthetics do we have? I honestly didn't know how to do that effectively without taking up a great deal of time in the Zoom environment. In an online, in an in-person environment, I know how to do that very well. So that's why I set it up for you to get your email response of your answers, and then you'll have the answer grid to do it yourself. So we kind of bypassed that piece, but we talked about the different communication styles. So anytime we do an exercise or run a poll, like we don't want to, excuse me, we don't want to do polls until we're in our training sessions. We want to do polls in our training sessions and then discuss them. See, if I had run a poll and said, how many of you have been in training? And I could have done that and I chose not to tell you the truth. It was my choice, right or wrong, it was my choice. But if I'd run a poll saying, what training have you had and everything else, then we would have discussed it because it's of no value. But when we went around the room the way we did, you already heard all the discussion. We didn't need to do individual discussions of what about Lillian's training experience or Pamela's or Carrie Lynn's or Cherry's, because we all were part of that discussion. So does that make sense? The important thing is whatever we do, we have to discuss. Otherwise, there's no training. It does no good to run a poll and say, oh, look, only 50% of you are visual. Okay, let's move on. There's no learning involved in that. Does that make sense?
Can I ask a question when you have a moment?
Let me see. I've got one at 1:30.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No, go ahead.
I realized that by your technique of audio, visual, all of the combined together, it's helpful because I just realized while you were talking that I really get tired if I just listen for a long time or just see for a long time. And to break it up is a very good observation I got from this.
Yeah. And remember, the 20 to 30 is a guideline, not an absolute rule. It's not, nobody's going to come in, the training police are not going to show up and say, you violated 20 to 30 minutes, didn't shift activities. But keep in mind, what I like about a Zoom environment, you do it in person as well, but I'm watching the room. Now, those of you hiding, which are eating your breakfast, eating your dinner, brushing your teeth, doing your fingernails, getting a manicure, I understand all that, but at least you showed up. But I'm watching the room to see how people are reacting as well. That's how I saw Carrie Lynn smile. And that also led to a great opportunity for Carrie Lynn to share those observations, which were of value. So we want to do that as well.
But what's the kinesiology part? When you're kinesthetic part, when you're talking, you let people hear, you show movement and the screen of other people. And what do you do on that part to help those people?
Well, as we said today, what we did is we did the exercise where you had to go to the form and fill out the form. That's actually doing something physically.
In a lecture, so if you're giving a presentation and a talk, then you do the same thing, give some kind of a form for someone to fill out? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, actually, what you'll see in the handout is actually that is an exercise. That same form you filled out is an actual exercise in the handout that you would do in person. You would actually have everybody fill it out. And then once they filled it out, I would give out the scoring grid. So then people could score themselves to see what their dominance was, whether they're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, or multiples. So that's the other thing is, and you've been in training rooms where there's toys around, there's squeeze toys and different things like that. That's also for the kinesthetics. The kinesthetic might sit there. That's a kinesthetic. So you might as well give them a squeeze toy that doesn't make sound and annoys everybody else to try to get them involved. There are ways of handling some of that in person. I may touch on it if we have some time, but I want to make sure we do cover I think we might have some time for that. We'll touch on that a little later of ways to deal with that with kinesthetic. But what I'd like you to get from what we just covered too, is that when we do the interactive activities, make sure we discuss them. Otherwise, there's no real learning. People say, oh, run a poll. But if you don't talk about it, no learning. It's just a poll. That's all it is. So the next slide is a question slide, just to let you know. And would you like to take a break? We skipped break earlier. Would people like to take a 5-minute break?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's do that right now then. 5 minutes, I'll time it down and go ahead and do whatever it is you need to do.
How are you doing, Solarzar?
I'm doing really well, thank you. I ran a few lines this morning, then I smoked some crack, and I'm feeling good. No, I'm doing fine, Abhijit. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Oh, good. I'm enjoying it.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I love your shirt. I think it's good for visual learners.
It's my cats too. It's my 2 black cats.
Oh.
So.
I have one. His name is Captain James T. Kirk. It's also a black cat.
All right. I think they're the best to have. That's I'm biased.
Oh yeah.
And you probably know this. They're the most abandoned cat are black cats.
Yeah, there was a lot of superstition around that, around their color, and so they try to protect them even around Halloween because people would make sacrifices with them.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about. They're so sweet.
Yeah, I won't let.
But I'm not opposed to taking any cat, any color, of any size.
I have to admit, I don't like hairless though. There's something about them. I don't know.
Well, my friend has one, and she says that they get greasy because they don't have the hair.
Yeah,
so it's like touching a warm sausage.
But they've got to stay moist. They've got to stay moist because they don't have.
Yeah, they get greasy, so she has to bathe it often and have a heating pad for it all the time because they get cold.
Yeah, no, just the look of them. I don't know. It's just me. That's to say, if I didn't want one, I wouldn't get one. Good work.
Yeah. Nobody's forcing you to get a hairless cat.
Yeah. It's only one hairless person in this household.
But you're trying to make up for it with the beard.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I wonder why humans were designed that way.
To keep themselves in hot weather. Solarzar, I have an observation. Since this is a great subject, I appreciate it so much. I've never heard anything like this, but what I noticed just now is for people that if you also have the kinesthetic type person that just moving around, getting up, taking this break is helpful because I think that's like a physical movement, just, stretching or doing something to get, is that kind of an attribute you could observe in people if they feel restless or something?
Yeah. Was somebody else saying something? Okay. No, absolutely. You should always try to check in on breaks. Now, in a club officer training, you may not have the luxury of really having them because you've got to complete an agenda in the 90 minutes. But I built several breaks into this in case they were needed, going on that premise that every 30 minutes we need to do something a little different. We need to be shifting, not staying on the same. Now, we could do it more frequently or a little less frequently. But yeah, that's something else, to get up, to stretch, to move. Carrie Lynn, thank you. That made me laugh.
I just want to say that it was something I was thinking too, with having people having their videos off. This is part of a thing with Zoom that I'm learning, is that I always say when I get on a Zoom meeting, please keep your video on, but if you're going to be moving around, turn it off. So I'm just trying to make the assumption that the people without their videos on are just the kinesthetic learners who need to be doing something and they're trying not to be distracting.
Very true. Excellent point. I'm glad you brought that out. That's a great point. Oh,
and moving around usually gives me headaches when it's jittery, like a fast. Right. That's why I turn off my video if I have to get up, because it's just too overwhelming for me.
Yeah, it's not cool to be moving around with your camera.
Yeah, so.
And that's what I do when I drive, right? Better to turn your camera off so people don't see all the distraction in the background.
All right. And Mamta said she's outside, and Kate said it hurts to move. So I'm sorry, Kate. I'm sorry, but thank you for being here. Just lie down, take it easy. And thank you for being here. So now we're going to go to our next area following questions, which are really how-to question. Now, there are two predominant types of questions. One is open and one is closed. Does anybody know the distinction between an open and closed question? Carrie Lynn's smiling because she knows, but she's not going to say, yeah. Well, let's keep it clear that an open question is used to open the discussion. There's no necessarily right answer. It's not a definitive answer. So if I said to Sarika, what has been your experience in other training sessions? And Sarika, you don't have to answer, it's just illustrated. I don't know the answer to that. It's essentially what a lawyer doesn't want to do when they're asking someone questions on the stand. They don't want to ask them an open question. They want to always have a question that's closed. Closed brings the conversation down. There's a right answer or a specific answer that goes with it. So open questions we use to ask a question to the group as general. Closed question, we can ask it to a person as well. And closed questions we use to bring the conversation down to a point. Does that make sense? And you'll have more information in the handout concerning those. But within open and closed questions, there are 4 other styles of questions. An open or closed question can be a direct question. So, as I said, with the question to Sarika, if I say, Sarika, What has been your experience in other training sessions? It's open because I don't know the answer, but it's direct because it's directed to someone specific. It's directed to Sarika. An overhead question is when we throw it out to the group. It can be a closed question, but very often those are open questions that we use to open the discussion. Just as I said, does anyone know the difference between open or closed questions? That's an overhead question. I threw it out to the group. Anyone could have answered with any answer that they wanted to choose, but it was to stimulate discussion, to get discussion going. It's very much like a table topics question. When we ask a table topics question, we throw it out, we want everybody thinking about it, and then we turn it into a direct question by asking someone. There's also a reversed question. Now, the next two, reversed and the one coming after it, which we'll mention in a moment, are really good in conflict situations. But a reversed question is, Pamela asks me, Solarzar, what do I do in this particular situation? And I say, well, Pamela, what would you do in that particular situation? I've now given it back to her to answer. Now, sometimes that's good when you don't know the answer to something, you give it back to them because the questioner maybe has an idea of what they're asking or why they're asking that I may not know. But when I reverse it back to her, I can then take it and also I can redirect it. I can say, well, Pamela, Daniel, what do you think Pamela should do in that situation? I've now taken Pamela's question and I've redirected it to Daniel. So open, opens the discussion, closed, brings it down, direct is directed to a person, overhead is to everyone, reversed is back to the person who asked, and redirect is to someone else from the question that was asked from someone else. Does that make sense? We're now going to do a group exercise that you can take off mute. We're going to have some questions. We're going to identify each question as whether it's open or closed, and then whether it's overhead, direct, reversed, or redirected. You're going to find this in the handout as well, but we're going to do this as a group because understanding questions is going to help us with the next part of our facilitation. So here's the question. What purpose do you think our new member orientation serves? Open or closed?
Open.
Open. Very good, Anna. And do you think it's overhead, direct, reversed, or redirected?
Overhead.
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 Overhead. Excellent. Now, contextually, we don't know if somebody asked it to me, and so as a result, I'm redirecting. But so don't overthink them. Just think what you think it is. Our next one, Diane, what are your thoughts on this? What function does your club's new member orientation serve?
Direct.
It's open and direct.
Well, actually, it's closed because it's a specific question. What function does your club's new member orientation serve? But you are correct that it's direct. So the reason it's closed is because, Diane, what function does your club's new? I don't know the answer, yes, as I said earlier, but Diane knows what her answer is. That's the reason it's closed, but I'll accept open. I could see it.
Yeah.
What are some of the problems with new member orientation? Open or closed?
Open.
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 Very good. And it's overhead.
Overhead, yeah.
I'm sorry, I hit the button before I asked.
What overhead is again? I forgot.
We throw it out to the group, everybody. We throw it out to everyone. Now, if attendance was a problem, what changes were made by the new executive committee? Open or closed?
Closed.
Closed.
Open.
Closed.
And actually, I'm going to tell you for 3 and 4, they could either be open or they could be closed. I just chose to put open in this case, mostly so you'd argue with me. I'm honest. I want to be honest because depending on the context, it could be an open question, but they seem very, very closed in the sense of they're very specific, especially number 4, even more than 3. Is 4 an overhead, a direct?
Direct.
No, it's overhead. Because remember, Sarika, direct is I'm going to call on you by name.
Oh,
Okay,
Directed to
but
a
wasn't this made directly asked? Oh, it's okay, it's context sentences.
Yeah.
I thought it was, this question was asked to the new executive committee.
No, it's not. It's an overhead
Okay.
question in a training session.
Okay.
Don't worry about this. It'll be more clear when you do the exercise in the handout. However, Mary, do you remember when the new member orientation program was started? Open or closed?
It's closed.
Yes, it's closed.
And direct.
And direct.
And it's direct. There you go. Now we're getting it. There you go. How about Robin, to get back to your question about recruiting new members, does anyone have an idea about this? Open or closed?
It's closed and it's a
Closed,
redirect, a reverse.
Well, no, it's a redirect. You're right the first time. But actually, look, does anyone have any idea about this? It's actually open.
yeah.
Does anyone? Not, but it is a redirect. We're taking Robin's question. That was great. And we're passing it off to everyone in an overhead way. But it is redirect. I don't want to confuse you by using the term. John, how many members attend meetings each week? Open or closed?
Closed.
Closed, direct.
Close direct.
Absolutely. That one makes it simple. You've got it. You're getting the, are there ways to get better attendance?
Open. Overhead.
Overhead.
There you go. Briefly, what are the points we covered so far?
Open,
Closed
overhead.
and direct.
Yeah, closed and
Oh.
overhead.
Overhead.
Excellent.
Okay, yeah.
And then Bill, can you think of other solutions to increase member attendance?
Direct and open.
That's right. There we go. Now, the reason of going through all that, which is kind of annoying and frustrating, I understand, is how do you use questions to facilitate training? We have open questions, closed questions. We have direct, we have overhead, we have reversed, and we have redirect. You want to stimulate discussion in your training session. What would you do?
I would ask direct questions.
Or overhead question. First, you start with an overhead. Who said direct? Was that Carrie Lynn?
Yeah.
Yeah. First, you start with an overhead, and then you could turn around and direct it. So let's say I threw an overhead question out, which was, you want to stimulate discussion. Nobody says anything. Daniel, how would you do that? Now I turn it into a direct. So you use the two to actually create that. But what Carolyn said is what I absolutely do all the time. I start with an overhead, wait for a pause, and then I direct it. And then by directing it, I would then say, well, Daniel shared that. What would you say, Anna? Do you have any thoughts on that? So now I'm starting to force the discussion, not force it in a harsh way, but excuse me a minute. I really like my vodka in the morning. But to force a way to, again, stimulate that discussion. Look, I keep hitting the back thing. There we go. So how about you want to cut off the discussion? Any thoughts on that?
I like where you're going with that direction, but we'll pick it up at the end of the meeting.
That's a good point too. You can do that. In one of my sessions, I think it was Abhijit who asked me after the session. In one of the sessions, I said, Daniel, I'm going to use you as my fall guy in this one. I said, Daniel, that's a great question. I want to move forward with what we're doing now, but I'll get back to that question later. And then after the meeting, Abhijit said, you never got back to that question. I said, absolutely not. Because it would have derailed everything we were doing. So I did that intentionally, which what Anna said. But you can also ask an individual direct question to say, Carrie Lynn, would you summarize what we've been discussing so far? And then move on from that. You could also ask one of the people involved in the discussion to do that as a way to gauge them. You want to bring someone into the discussion, ask them a general direct question. Going back to Carrie Lynn's point earlier, I want someone to be involved because they're not being involved. I want to make sure they're engaged. If two participants are engaging in a side chat conversation, what could you do? Ask one of them a direct question. After they're about what you're training, ask the other one a direct question. So you can use the questions as ways of managing your discussions and managing the flow of your training. Is this making sense to everyone?
Total.
You're asked a question you're not sure you can answer. I love this one. I actually mentioned it earlier for those who caught it. You redirect or reverse the question. Pamela asked me a question I don't know. I reverse it back to her. Well, Pamela, how would you do that? Or I then take it and say, well, Kate, how would you do that? I redirect it to Kate to see how she would handle that. And I get out of hot water. But what does it do? It keeps the discussion flowing, keeps the training going, gives me an opportunity to provide a summary later also as a result of that.
And it gives other people an opportunity to think about it and express something too.
Right. Absolutely, Pamela. Thank you. You want to test the level of support? Ask an overhead question. Two participants are debating a point. Everyone is watching. We may have this. We're going to have this in one of our trainings. It's going to happen at some point or another. We may be an observer. We may be a trainer. So ask another attendee a direct question. So I could say, that's very good, but Sarika, I'd like to see if you could summarize the discussion so far. I've now taken it away from them, given it to someone else to summarize in a non-threatening way, and then it allows me to now move the discussion from Sarika forward.
Beautiful.
Discussion among other members been going on for some time. You're uncertain how long it's going to take. You've got to stop the clock going. Ask the group an overhead question for a summary of the discussion. This has been a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate all of the dialogue going on. Great ideas. However, Daniel, would you be able to summarize what we've heard so far? Again, you're taking it away from those members. You're taking control of the situation without being threatening or saying, we don't have time for this. Can you guys please be quiet? Can you shut up? Did your parents have any children that lived? You just go on.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yes, Solarzar, I'm toying with the idea. You could also, maybe ask, what are you getting out of this discussion? Which may be a little dangerous to ask, but.
Well, you could also ask them to first start by asking them to summarize their points too. You could say, how about, so let's say, and I apologize, let me come back so I can see more people. So let's say Raghu and Mamta are having this discussion. So I could say, okay, Mamta, how about you summarize Raghu's points? Raghu, how about you summarize Mamta's points? Now, what do you see through your summary that you're getting out of this discussion? Going to your question, Daniel, or throw it out to the group then and say, what do you see as the differences in their points, where their disagreement is? Okay, let's move on. I'm going to keep coming.
Being a good referee too, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what we use questions for. Sometimes when these dialogues erupt in our training, we don't realize we're still in control, because through the use of questions, how we redirect, how we reverse, how we can also throw out an overhead to the group. Well, what are the differences between Raghu and Mamta's points now that they've summarized? We've now taken it out of their hands, taken it back in our hands, and we're managing the training going forward. Okay.
That's good individually too.
Oh yeah.
If somebody doesn't understand.
Now, if there's no response to the original question, if you throw out an overhead, then you can also do the direct questions as we mentioned in both of these cases. Now, if they've been debating a point without much progress, which we've already touched on, it's all very similar. Ask each one a direct question to summarize the position of the other person. And we did touch on that. And if you want to know if the attendees are gaining, ask both overhead and direct questions from the group. We'll stop the share here. We just took a break, so we're not going to take another one unless somebody has to run away, or Carrie Lynn, you got to feed the chickens. Yeah, she did that already. But does the use of questions, now you've been using questions. I'll guarantee you every one of you has been using questions but you may not have thought of how you can use the question to really manage your training session. So training is about the attendee, but we're that, as Pamela's used the term, we're the referee, we're the facilitator, we're the trainer, we're the one that's steering the ship. We need to make sure we get to port. Now, we can allow all the discussion we want, but we still have to get to port. And that's how we use questions to keep it. Does anyone have any questions about questions?
I do, because sometimes there's comments rather than questions. I tend to make comments to understand, to really ask a question. Does
Well,
that
please
make
explain
sense?
that to me, Pamela. I want to make sure.
My communication. Okay. When I want clarification, I don't say, can you clarify? I more or less say what I heard, and my question is really not a direct question to explain something. It's really for me to hear it a different way or the same. So it's not always questions that I have. They're comments that mean clarification. Maybe it's just a learning to ask questions better. Maybe that's what it boils down to.
Well, so what you saw me do when you made your comment was ask you to clarify your comment, which is the same thing you would do as a trainer. Pamela makes a comment. I'm not really sure. Either I can say, yes, Pamela, that's correct. Or in this case, I wasn't really sure what the question was or the comment was. So I asked for clarification. I think that's important. When I talked about earlier having some people at the training, I want to tie this into your thing, that were very opinionated, very strong in their views of things. I'm going to share for you one thing that I did, which is not quite the same, but Pamela, you made me think of it right now. So first, before I do that, Pamela, did I answer your question in terms of if you have a comment, someone makes a comment, you could either agree with the comment, say, yes, that's correct, or if you don't understand it, you ask for clarification. You should always, with the comment, say, yes, or I don't understand, or whatever else, but acknowledge the person who made the comment first and foremost, just as if you would if they asked a question. Is that?
And it did help me to understand what I said better. By your feedback, please explain yourself more. That was really good. So it answered my own question.
Okay, thank you. So I want to talk about this opinionated person. Very, 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 very opinionated. Let's see. I'm going to use a name of no one who's here. So I'm going to use Bill. There's no Bills in the room. So Bill made it very clear that he'd been to 27,000 club officer trainings, and, I'm just doing this because I got to do it for my club. I've been doing this role for, ever since Christ was a corporal. I've just been doing it forever. I can talk about it in my sleep. Nobody needs to tell me anything. I'm just here for the club. And I said, well, Bill, with all your experience, I'm going to rely on you throughout the course of the training. I'm going to rely on your opinion for things. But I also knew a little bit about Bill. Bill likes to hear Bill talk, and Bill likes to pontificate. I knew this about Bill. I was fortunate that I knew it. So I would say things to him like, well, Bill, what do you think of Pamela's question? How about you, Daniel? What do you think of Pam? So I would call on Bill and then immediately move to someone else. Now, truly, by the end of the training, Bill felt he was called on a lot, but I never waited for his answers till the very end when I asked him if he had something he would like to add. And periodically, I would let him add something, but for the most part, I would always say to him, Bill, I'm sure you agree with that. How about you, Sarika? I would actually just keep using his name, bringing it out and moving to someone else, because I knew Bill was one of the people we're going to talk about in a little bit. He's a problem participant. I did let him get some information in, but I also used the movement of questions to keep him from monopolizing the conversation. Now, you don't have to be as abrupt as I was. You can be much kinder because I'm sure each and every one of you are. But I'm just saying is remember, as the trainer, it's not that it's not about you, because it's not, but you are in charge of the training session. And everyone in the room is important to you more than the one person. You have to make sure as many people get what they're trying to get out of the training, not just the one. If that makes sense. Yes, Pamela. You can only make comments. You can't ask any questions.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. Sometimes a person, a facilitator, I've heard them, I only want to hear questions. I don't want any comments. And it makes it hard to formulate a question sometimes to understand. How would you, I guess, give it back just the way you demonstrated a minute ago, but how do you control the meeting so you don't hear comments? I mean, some people are like that. They don't want any comments.
Well, I can't talk about what other trainers did in a session that I certainly wasn't a part of. So I won't deal with that. That's a trainer's decision. Now, for instance, I prefer to ask people not to have, as you saw, not to have discussions in the chat, because to me, that's distracting. If you want to send a question, even if you want to throw a comment, I'm kind of okay with that. I just don't want discussions because I want to know that people are, for the most part, focused on what we're training. So why a trainer said that, I don't know. That's just theirs. But you could then say, you could take your comment and frame it in the form of a question. So I have a question. It may be more of a comment, but did you mean ba-da-da? Or does this mean this? Do I understand it correctly if blah, 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 blah? And the blah, blah, blah is the most important part, by the way. I want to point that out. So get your blah, blah, blahs in there. But try to frame it that way. I don't know. I'm going to assume that when someone made that comment, it was really, they didn't want people having dialogues. They might have just wanted questions focused on the training. And they may have thought by saying, don't do comments was to really just keep people from not having.
Because it could go down the wrong road of what they want to do.
That's correct. Yeah. Now I've also, for instance, when we had Patricia Fripp at Fall Fusion, I was asked to help moderate that session. And she was very specific. She said, I don't look at comments. Tell people not to send me comments. Tell them not to send me questions. I don't look at them. And so my job, of course, was to look at that. I set that up with everyone in advance, but I have my chat window open. And so I look over there and I look at what's popping up and I look at that. That's something I do, something not everyone wants to do. And in a smaller room too, this is not a very big room, but in a smaller room too, you could just say, like we did earlier, ask your question out, ask it, so we can hear it, especially when the slides are going. You notice I picked on Sarika and Carrie Lynn and Daniel and Pamela, because those are the ones I could see when the slides were open. I couldn't see some of the other folks. So I didn't have all of them in my visual. So it's good in my training sessions. I want to hear people ask their questions, because if you're not getting it, somebody else is not getting it. You know how they say about complaints? If one person complains, there's at least 5 others that didn't verbalize their complaints. The same thing with questions.
Thank you for expanding on that question.
You're welcome. All right, let's move forward. That was a wonderful break. I feel refreshed. Now we're going to talk about that problem participant. We all have them, and maybe at times we've been one. We may not know. So first, I hit the wrong thing. I hit the stop share instead of go forward. First, of course, is the disinterested person. Now, somebody who just seems disinterested in the training going on. Are there any thoughts about what you might do if somebody doesn't seem engaged? And Anna, if you don't answer this one, I'm going to lose complete respect for you. Not true.
Ask them a direct question.
So you have a disinterested person. You could see, you're going around, you can see this person doesn't seem engaged at all. What could you do to potentially engage them in the conversation? Ask a direct question. That was the answer. Ask them a direct question. Just see what they're doing. Even the people that don't have videos on now, I could always turn around and ask a direct question to any one of them to make sure they're still engaged in the conversation. And if they say they didn't get the question, that's fine. Just repeat it. Don't dwell on it. Don't deal anything. You're just engaging them in the conversation. Another one of our problem participants is the argumentative type. Have you ever had one of these in a session? Just wants to argue every point. Yes. No, that shouldn't be blue. It has to be green. Reason it has to be green is because it originally started as fuchsia, but then the committee got together and decided green was much more visible, and a lot of guys don't like fuchsia. Years ago, when I was in the Marine Corps, I was a staff sergeant at the time, and we were at what was known as a boss's night. And so we had all of our officers around us, and my wife came at the time, and I was wearing an Izod shirt, and it was pink. And my wife said to this colonel I worked for, she said, "Colonel, will you tell him that Marines don't wear pink?" And he turned to me and he said, "Staff Sergeant Delaporta, Marines don't wear pink." And I said, "Well, Colonel, you're obviously mistaken, because as you can see, I'm wearing pink." So that's an argumentative type right there. But so when we have argumentative types, what do you think we can do to kind of manage their behavior? Any thoughts?
Well, number one, don't take it personal. And number two is, do you have any ideas about, engage them, maybe ask a question? I don't know if that would be appropriate or.
Well, let's consider an argumentative type. Those are good ideas, both of them, absolutely. But an argumentative type is, chances are Abhijit's going to argue the point with me. So I say, try to do this. Adults like to learn. Velcro learning is a great way for adults to learn. And Abhijit said, "Well, I don't agree with that. In my experience, da, 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 da." So now he throws it back at me. So what am I going to do? I'm going to send it to someone else. I'm just going to send it off to someone else. I'm not going to engage, but I'm not going to act like I'm not hearing his question or his issue. I'm just going to say, "Well, Lipping, what do you think about what Abhijit said? Jerry, what do you think about what Lipping shared about Abhijit's comment?" I'm going to keep that thing bouncing around a little bit so that I'm not engaged with Abhijit and his arguments. Okay, a couple of things come out of that. Abhijit's been heard. I'm not going to engage. So it's not going to become a back and forth between me and him. And then once I get it to someone I could take it back from, I gave it to Lipping. From Lipping, I gave it to Cherry. I've now moved it a couple of levels. Now I'll take it back and move forward. I'm no longer engaged with that issue at all. Okay. Now we're talking an argumentative type versus an angry type, because we're going to get to an angry type also in a little bit. So then after the argumentative type, and you're going to have, this is discussed in the handout. These things are discussed. The overly talkative type. What do you think about someone who just likes to keep on talking? Well, yeah, you could point at yourself, Pamela, but you're not interrupting the discussion to keep on talking. You're not throwing things into the chat to say, "Hey, we should be doing this and we should be doing that." Because I asked at the beginning that people not do that. You're complying with that. So don't point at yourself like you're the overly talkative type.
Can you just tell him to shut up? Just kidding.
I mean, someone that's annoying and off the subject, off the topic. That's what you're talking about.
Right.
People distracted by other things, perhaps.
Yeah. What I do, and you could say to them, and Anna, I know you wouldn't say that. I'm sure you wouldn't say that because you're so much kinder than I am. But I'm sure you would say, "Okay, let's not do this, Bill. Let's go." But what you can do is just start directing questions to other people. Ignore them. Essentially, you kind of ignore them. Like my guy who I knew was going to pontificate, I would use his name. I would say, "Bill, I'm sure you've thought about that. Sarika, what do you think about the question?" And so now I've directed it away from him so that he doesn't start engaging in these long, protracted discussions. So I've kind of called attention to him and moved it. Yes, Daniel.
Yeah, okay. The problem though that I tend to run into more is that they will take a particular question and just go on and on. And my usual mode is just to let them go, and because it's a one-time thing. But I'm just wondering, how do you take care of something that you would have to interrupt if you were
Well,
to shorten it?
First place, in most cases, except that I knew about this particular individual, in most cases, you're not going to know somebody's overly talkative till they've demonstrated it. So that is the first thing. But I could say that those are all really, excuse me a minute, those are all really interesting points. I'd like to summarize that very quickly, and then let's move on to the next thing. Or I could say, you know, those are really interesting points. I'd like to see what others think about that. Raghu, could you summarize what Daniel shared? And then let's move on to the next point. So I would, in no uncertain terms, interrupt in a polite way as best I could. You know, I'd find it, at some point, most people have to take a breath. Most, you know. Now, if this is a scuba diver that doesn't take breaths for, you know, every 5 minutes, might have to wait it out. But as soon as they think, Daniel, that was a really interesting point. I'd like to jump in here a minute and see if Raghu could summarize that for us. Or Tam, what did you think of Daniel's point? Again, I'm going to try to shift it around as best I can, but I am going to interrupt.
And so Zara, one thing that I've used in the past is just the whole timing thing. You know, I appreciate the comments, but we have X amount of time to conclude and we need to move on.
Yeah. Well, I try not to use the timing only for me. I think that that's wonderful, Carlene, and I bet you find that works effectively for you as well. I try to not use the time because it's too much of a finger point for me. You know, it's like, well, you're holding up my time.
I agree.
So, but I'm just saying that's a choice. So you can use what Carlene said. If you're very comfortable with that, don't be shy about using that. It does work. I try to move it and then take it away, take it back.
Isn't it how you say it too? Because you could say it in an offensive way or a caring way that you acknowledge that that person does have something that they want to know.
And you can say, you know, that was excellent. We need to move on. You can do any way you want. But, you know, as Carlene's pointing out, you're the trainer. You're going to do what works for you in the situation and what you find effective. Don't ever think anything I'm saying is an absolute. You must do this. You know, that's how it must be done. You know, yes, Carrie Lynn.
If I may add just something on the other side of remembering when you're interrupting somebody, sometimes it's a kindness because they don't know when to stop. They don't know how to stop talking sometimes. So just saying, you know, whatever, however you're going to interrupt, I often use, you know, thank you for sharing all of that with me. I have noticed some people are like, you know, thank you for interrupting me because I just didn't know how to finish this. I didn't know how to finish my thought. So I just want to add that as trainers, like it's a kindness sometimes to stop people.
Sarika, you wanted to say something as well. Thank you, Carrie Lynn. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Carolyn. That helps me, but I have a hard time interrupting because
okay, we can.
Maybe it's me coming that is like I'm being rude. So I often have to try 3 times before I succeed at the interruption. So I often look for the stop of the sentence to get in because that guilt in me comes out. What is a good so now it makes me feel happier that I might be doing somebody justice by interrupting them. So that's how do you do that very well?
Well, Carlene, you talked about how you do it. What do you wait for before you would say your comment to someone? Is there something you look for or a pause or?
I try to wait for a pause, but if the person has made the point, and actually that's really what I look for. If the point has been made, then I jump right in because then this person is repeating the point and there's no need to repeat or stretch the point out. So I will kindly jump in. And yes, I usually try to time thing, but I wait for the point to be made.
Thank you.
So in taking off Carlene's point, Sarika, you could simply say, what a wonderful point. You know, doesn't matter where they are. They've made the point. What a wonderful point. And just move on. So,
Thank you.
remember, at the end of the day, your responsibility is to manage the training. And you're managing the training for everyone. So if you try to keep that as your focus, it might make it easier to say, I need to cut this off a little bit.
Very good, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then we'll let everybody know in the district that you're actually rude and you cut everybody off all the time. So you don't have to worry about that. We'll take care of that part. All right, another one of our problem participants. And people, thank you for letting me tease you, by the way. Another one is the rambling type, which is similar to the overly talkative type, and it's the same thing. You want to cut in, you want to redirect away from them, you want to get other people engaged, and very often asking someone to summarize what they're saying is one way to do it. Thank you so much for sharing that. What do you think we should do with that, Sarika? What do you think we should do with that, Carrie Lynn? What is the summary of what they've said? Then there's the controversial type. Now, controversial as we use it here is really someone that's always trying to not necessarily argue, but they just really see a problem with everything. Tell them, as we've discussed earlier, let's talk about that later. That's really an excellent point. Let me get through some of this and we can come back to that later. And as we did in that one session, I never came back to it deliberately because it really wasn't core to the training. It wasn't important for the training. Who gets to make that decision? I do. I'm the trainer. Does it mean I'm right? May not mean I'm right, but I still get to make that decision. I'm the trainer and I'm trying to manage the whole. So if somebody really has to challenge everything, Daniel, you're going to say something. No? Looked like you wanted to say something, so I was coming to you. No. But if I get to make that decision as the trainer, that's my job because my job is the whole, not any one person. Now, that doesn't mean I want to dismiss any one person, but I want to try to make sure. For instance, I had a training as a vice president of membership. Someone wanted to ask about using PayPal. I said, that's more of the, I said, I'll send you information on the use of PayPal, but it's not core to this training. That's core to the treasurer's training. And the person said to me, well, why not? I said, because it's about the treasurer who manages the money. I'll send you information, but we're not going to talk about it. Well, I think we should. I'm just going to say one thing about the Zoom environment. We have the ability to kick people out of the room if we have to. Don't ever fail to use that if you need to. Now, I didn't kick this person out of the room, but we have to remember that, going back to the thing, it's the whole. We're in it for the whole. We're not in it for any one person. And if we need to kick people out of the room, we just go up to our participants thing if we're a co-host and we send them bye-bye. They won't be able to come back. Yes, Pam.
Is that similar to an argumentative type? And can you direct it to somebody else or something?
Yes, well, actually, you can, no, not in this case. For instance, let's say going back to Carrie Lynn's Sergeant at Arms issue. She's doing role play. And during the role play, suddenly I say, hey, how do we do PayPal for members? It has nothing to do with Sergeant at Arms. It doesn't belong in that training. Carrie Lynn has an agenda of what she's trying to cover for the Sergeant at Arms. That's not part of it. Maybe she'll be able to get to it after she covers that agenda. Maybe she says that, and she says that's not part of this training. If there's time, we can cover it later. But if the person wants to continue to pursue that point right now in the training, you know, you've got to move off from them. Yes, you can, but you don't want to continue that discussion because even moving it to someone else continues the discussion for something that's not advancing the training forward.
Well, I guess what you're saying is give it back to Carrie. Carrie can handle that. You could talk about that later, or the treasurer or something, just that and move it on that way. That it's not part of this discussion, but you know, I'm sure she will help you later or something like that.
Yeah, during the early 2000s, for over 3 years, I was the trainer for District 4 before we had a District 101. So I would do training sessions up and down the coast. One of the training sessions, and there was about 30 people, it was an in-person training. one of the ladies asked, I want to know how best to do technical training. And I said, that's not one of the objectives of this session, technical training. You'll learn training skills and you'll learn skills you can apply to technical training, but we won't specifically address technical training objectives because there are some differences. There are some things you want to include in that. And she continued on, why not? Why aren't we doing that? And I said, because it's not one of the objectives of today's training. And she persisted for a little because that's what she wanted. All I could do is say, it's not one of the objectives. You'll get good value out of the other pieces. If you want more information on that, we can talk after the session. And that was the end of it. And I moved on. And she actually spoke while I was moving on. It didn't matter to me. I moved on because I couldn't stay there and get into a debate of why we're not covering it. It was never advertised as part of it. It wasn't part of the objective. And there were some specific uniquenesses to technical training that aren't covered in regular training. It's the same thing with the question about the PayPal or anything else. Don't let it tie up your training. Now, going back to these questions, all of these questions deal with training. That's why we're dealing with them. You know, no matter what you say, they're about issues we're going to confront. So, and then after the,
I have a
yes.
good question. As a VPE, I often get this question about, the pathways and the legacy path. And often I am of the opinion, I can't help you with the legacy path. I am here to do the pathways training. So I have often redirected them and say, I have had these people and they say, I'm sorry, we won't be talking about the legacy path. If you want the legacy path, you have ideas to discuss about the legacy path, take it to the PQD or anybody in the district. I can't help you with that because is that okay? And there are people who have come after me for that, but
Absolutely. I mean, let's put it in context. There is no legacy path anymore. I mean, legacy is a legacy. It's the cornerstone. It's in the foundation and the cornerstone of the building. It's back there. It's back there. It's not here today. We're an educational organization. One of our goals as a member, because it's on our membership, is that we'll do assignments from our educational program. What's our educational program? Pathways. That's it. So we can't discuss, there is no more legacy path. They can't apply their legacy path to pathways, not decisions you could change. And the training is not the forum for venting that. Send them to the PQD as you did. And if they want to manage the education of their members, it has to be pathways. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. You can't.
Thank you.
You're welcome. By the way, Sarika, your quota of questions are filled. I just
But
go ahead, Daniel.
yeah, that's a really interesting thing to bring up. If someone were to bring that up with me, I think I'd probably see that as an opportunity to, first of all, ask them and probe why it is they're interested in the legacy and try to get their concerns expressed about pathways and then address those concerns.
Excellent point. That's an excellent point. Excellent. Any other thoughts on that from anyone? Okay. And then after the controversial type, I'm sorry, who was speaking? Abhijit, were you saying something or? No. Last, of course, is the angry participant. They're angry. They might challenge you. They might threaten you. They may argue with you. There's a lot of ways for handling an angry participant in person that we don't have necessarily in Zoom. So I'm going to touch on the in-person in case you ever confront it. It's a good time for a break. Have a one-on-one with that person. Try to find out what they're angry about. Maybe they are angry with you. Maybe they encountered you once in the supermarket and you cut in front of them and took their place in line and they've never forgiven you for the past 3 years. Who knows what it is? Maybe they're angry about something else. Very often an angry person wants to be heard. What you want to do is get that energy away from the group. In a Zoom environment, these are just some thoughts I have, and I'll throw it open to the group to see what thoughts you have. I would say you seem angry about something. What is the issue that you would like to address? let them say it. Say, okay, thank you for sharing that. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Now, I'm going to try to keep it from being me, if you want to understand. I'm going to try to keep directing it around the room. If no one has any thoughts, if the person retains angry, I'm going to kick them out of the room. The person won't settle down. If I can't let them see that actually it's important that we move forward with the training and get the rest of the issues concerned with the members, then I'm going to kick them out of the room. We're not in the business of being abused. Now, if that's your thing, no judgment, but in a training session, we're not in the business of being abused. And so we have to recognize that it's not necessarily wrong for people to be angry at different times, but it is wrong to have the energy of the anger permeate your training room. So it's contextual. There's not one right answer, but how have you dealt with that, Carrie Lynn, in different situations?
Yeah, a lot of it, exactly what you said. A lot of it is they want to be heard. And so I try to quickly reflect back to them. This is what I'm hearing you're angry about. If it's appropriate to what we're discussing, maybe we can spend a little bit of time on it. If not, I deflect to if we have time at the end, we can discuss that, or I would be happy to have a different session with you. If it's something personal, it's like, let's I'd be happy to listen to you later.
How about you, Carlene? How have I'm sure you've experienced that.
Not really. No, no. Folks don't usually get angry with me. It's hard to get, I'm joking. But one thing I'm thinking about here in the virtual environment is that we could, as you mentioned, for the in-person, depending on where you are in the session, we could take that break. We certainly could take that break. And if let's say we do have the main room open there with 1 or 2 people, then we can invite that person to just, not invite them. We can just move them on over to the main room and then perhaps meet the person there, just have a conversation while we're on a break. So we can use the Zoom platform for that as well. And Lillian knows, Lillian has the power to just move people around. So Lillian is our Zoom.
You see her? She's doing that. She's doing that.
She's ready. She has the power. She could move them. But I think sometimes, say again, Lillian.
I put them in a room by themselves.
That's right. Put them time out.
Time out.
Time out.
I'll join you in a bit.
That's right. Oh goodness, that's what I have on that. We thankfully, we really haven't had anyone who has been so angry in a session, but we've had some angry folks, but not in a session. And if we did have some level of anger, the person or persons would usually connect with us afterwards.
And actually, have anybody had any angry participants? Not argumentative, but angry? No, if people shaking their heads, no.
I would say for the most part, Toastmasters is pretty well behaved.
Yeah, this is Toastmasters.
Except for Solarzar.
Well, that's true. I mean, let's put that out there. That's true. Yeah, I think for the most part, we have more of the argumentative. Controversial could even go back to this question of the pathways thing in the legacy system. And if you're teaching VPEs, you can plan for that. How am I going to deal with that if that question comes up? How can I prepare for that in advance? Because it's likely to come up. Daniel, you raised your finger. Did you have another question or point, or you're just saying kind of a yes to that, right? Okay, thank you, sir. So plan for the controversy because you can plan for those in advance. What are things people are going to ask in this training session I'm doing that might come up? Right now, for instance, throughout, no matter which session you're doing, it might even come up in Sergeant at Arms. Membership is big for everybody throughout Toastmasters. Membership questions are going to come up. How does it apply to the specific office you're training? What questions can you answer? Even if it doesn't apply to Sergeant at Arms, well, your vice president of membership and your president and executive committee should have a plan for the club, and you should actually address those concerns to them. Different things back and forth. I'm not giving you the absolute answers, but you could plan what you would say if those things come up. Membership, dues, retention, and pathways. Very typical topics. Plan for that. Just think about it in advance in case it comes up. Those are likely to be the controversies. And chances are there's always someone who does want to complain about why don't we do the legacy system? And the reason we don't do it is because we don't do it. I don't know about you, but I didn't get a vote. You didn't get a vote, I'm sure. So,
Well, these issues could come up in a meeting too, these same things, the angry or the controversial, before you even start the meeting amongst members, I've noticed.
sure. One of the things that is addressed in the handbook that we didn't address here in the handout is actually how you can prepare in advance. Now that applies both to your Zoom and both to your in-person sessions or your Zoom sessions. You can prepare some of those things in advance. For instance, Pamela's an area director. When she goes to visit clubs, she can anticipate that these are going to be some of the topics. You can prepare for that in advance. You can use these same question techniques in person. So if somebody challenges you in an executive committee meeting or a club meeting as an area director, you can then turn around and redirect that question. Well, how would you handle that? Or how do you think this club should do that? So remember, these questioning techniques are not just for training. You can use them in any situation where you're dealing with people of different types. Keeping in mind that 70% are visual, 20% are auditory, 10% are kinesthetic. But if you're dealing with scientists, that's not going to be. If you're dealing with a lot of systems engineers and developers, not going to be. It's going to skew. But my real point is that you can use these question techniques anytime. I would advise try not to use them too much with partners because it gets a little formulaic and sometimes can inflame the conversations. Like when she says, you should take the trash out. Well, why do you think I should take the trash out?
Yeah, good one.
May not work quite the same. But even as Kate put into the chat, training is about involving others all the way through. So we've covered quite a bit so far. Remember for your learning points, one, you want to set the learning climate. You give a welcome, you give an overview, you give your ground rules. We did that here. Welcome. And I told you a little bit about myself and about training as it applied to this training. An overview of what we're going to do. We talked about what we're going to cover in terms of the rules, talked about what we're going to cover in terms of the learning objectives to give you a sense. I didn't give you an agenda. I didn't say, here's the agenda of what we're going to cover so you could check it off as we went along. I just gave you, here's what I hope you can take away from this. Here's the learning objectives. We use the session starters, which are low risk, includes everyone, and is related to the content. We can do that for every training we're doing. Now, for instance, when Carolyn talked about training sergeant at arms, let's say you find someone, I've been a sergeant at arms for the last 10 years. You go around, you do your little icebreaker session starter. You could start right in with that one if you chose to, Carolyn, if it was appropriate, of saying, well, Bill, how do you start your meeting at Club XYZ? And you could start right in with that. Now you've engaged Bill, the very experienced member. You've got some input from him. You could do that in any one of your sessions where you have an experienced member. Unlike what I was talking about earlier, you could say right up front, is that, what do you think the most important things of this session are? Even though you've asked that, you could say, what do you think are really important that we should focus on? Because blah, 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 blah. Get to that and engage those people right away to keep the session moving forward. I hope that was not confusing, but am I locked up? Oh, no, I'm not. So once again, low risk includes everyone and everything is related to the content. And then allow the adults to make their choices. You do an inventory and a gap analysis and their personal objectives to find out what people want to get out of the training. We're progressing from the known to the unknown. In other words, we're taking them to where they haven't been. That's the unknown. It's unknown to them. We now know where everybody was at the start of this session and what they wanted to get out of it. We want to do Velcro learning to relate to things that they are familiar with. We did that today by referring back to club officer training, because most of you are going to apply this to some level of club officer training. And I want to kind of go into this by reminding us that today's success is the result of good judgment. Good judgment is the result of experience, and experience is the result of bad judgment. So everything we do in doing our training is what we do in Toastmasters. It's a learning lab where we're applying things as we go forward, and we learn by doing. That's the end. Are there any questions before we go into the final wrap-up?
Do you do these types of presentations, which I'm totally enjoying, to other groups, or is it just dedicated to Toastmasters? Because I think it's excellent for many groups to hear this in their leadership.
Well, actually, when you receive the handout, you'll notice much of the material is copyrighted to my presentation skills for the mildly phobic, the highly anxious and mildly phobic. I'm actually losing the name of my own session now. Here it's actually my copyright presentation. Presentation skills. Where is it? For the anxiety-ridden and the mildly phobic. So this is all extracted from that, and I use it and I adapt it to the sessions that I do, to answer your question. So the answer is yes, I do if asked.
Did you learn a lot of this by being in the Marines?
No, I actually took formal training. In Marines, I was trained in technique of military instruction, which is very, very different. It has a much more structured technique and view. And then I took the training through the training clinic. I spent a couple of years. It's actually a total of 4 months of training collectively, but I had to take a variety of different classes on different things in order to get it, because I was very interested in training. Now, Toastmasters does have their speaker to trainer program. And in the past, I've tried to incorporate the two of those together, but I chose to not do that this time. I chose to just focus on the core training skills, but we did cover a lot of information germane to Toastmasters. So I'm going to put two things into the chat. The first one, hopefully it'll go, is evaluation form. There we go. The link to the evaluation form. The second one I want to let you know is the link to the form to actually put down, if you've already done this, for some of you may have, to put down what your skill sets are for training club officer training. In other words, which offices you're best for, or which offices you feel you could do. And if you would fill that out as well. By attending the Train the Trainer, some of you have already attended other sessions, but also it puts you onto our list of potential trainers for club officer training in District 101. And I would appreciate if you would take some time to fill those out. But before you do that, there's one last thing I would really like to share with you. Let's see if we can do this. I'm going to put myself in speaker view. There we go. So now I'm in speaker view. Maybe I'm not. Am I in speaker view for all of you? There we go.
I spotlighted you.
You spotlighted me, thanks. Okay, so in this envelope, I have 4 cards from a large deck of cards. Now these 4 cards represent the 4 queens, because the feminine is the creative energy in the universe. And I'm going to clip it up here so it won't move from there. Now I'm going to pull one of the queens out. I'm going to pull another one of the queens out. Now you'll notice in a deck of cards, the queens could be red or black. These two are the same color. Carrie Lynn, are they red or black?
They're red.
They're red. Sarika. since they're red or black, since they're red, that means this is the Queen of Diamonds and this is the Queen of Hearts. Which one would you like to use?
Queen of Diamonds.
Queen of Diamonds. Diamonds are a girl's best friend, aren't they? I'm going to take the Queen of Diamonds and place her face up in here, face the Queen of Hearts down on top. Now, here's what I said. In this envelope that you've observed this entire time are 4 cards representing the 4 queens, the creative energy of the universe. I pulled out 2. Carrie Lynn said they were red. Sarika said she wanted to use the Queen of Diamonds. I said I placed the Queen of Diamonds face up in this packet. Now notice the Queen of Diamonds is face up, but I was so sure you were going to do that she's from a different deck of cards altogether. She has a red back. As a matter of fact, she's the only one that has a face. So when you're doing training, remove my spotlight, Abhijit. When you're doing training, remember that trainers should always attempt to anticipate the needs of those they train. Think about what the attendees may want to get out of your training before you do it, and make that one of the objectives of your training as well. Thank you very much for your time today. We went quicker than I thought we would, but please fill out the evaluation and please fill out the trainer expertise thing.
Thank you so much, Solarzar. We really learned a lot today. Thank you for going through each and every details, and the discussion was very helpful. Appreciate
And
it.
thank you
Solarzar.
everyone for your participation, because that's the element, that's the training right there. It's your participation. So thank you all.
Well, thank you, Solarzar. It was excellent. I really appreciated the time that you spent to help us. Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you, all of you, for attending, for taking time from your Saturday to attend, and I hope there's some value in it for you.
Thank you very, very much. That was excellent.
Thank you, Carrie.
We
Yeah,
can
it was.
tease Solarzar back. Solarzar, I got nothing out of this training. Absolutely nothing.
And I would appreciate it if you would actually put that in the comments so that I can redirect the question to Dan.
And make sure that I don't attend any of your other future trainings.
Exactly. That's really important.
So
Well
we-
done.
Oh,
Well
sorry.
done. I love the shirt. Well
Oh,
done.
So we have 2